Laura Delano was this sort of golden woman who had a really vibrant and charismatic presence. She came from a wealthy background in Greenwich, Connecticut, and sort of was instilled with this idea that she would be the best and that anything less represented a failure. She was 14 at this time when she was increasingly aware of the sense of fraudulence or sort of being an imposter in her life. She became very angry, and she had started cutting herself, and eventually was diagnosed as bipolar. She was medicated at an age where she wasn't able to understand maybe the source of what was really bothering her so much. And she'd been on psychiatric medications for over 10 years. I discovered Laura's blog, and she had written in some detail about the experience of going off of psychiatric medications. She wanted to sort of figure out what her experience of the world was without them. This sort of unexplored question in psychiatry, which is there are these pills that really do help people in their lives, but what do we know about how long people are on them, and how do we decide when to get off? And when they do get off, do we know how to have them get off? Alan Francis, one of the editors of the DSM, he described it as a kind of public health experiment in which young people and old people are put on medications for years and years, and there's just very little knowledge about what happens after that. We don't have longitudinal studies about people on these medications for decades.
They get a very quick prescription of a pill, and then there may not be an endpoint.
Laura got to Harvard when she was 18. She again started to feel that same way where she didn't really know who she was, and she felt depressed. She had to perform at a debutante ball because her family had this tradition of it. Her sisters described her as fitting in seamlessly and sort of being part of the society world. And Laura described feeling like the symbolism was so literal that she was supposed to be on this stage performing as a person that she was not. She just described that as the moment that she felt like she needed to ask for help.
My first label was bipolar disorder, and then I'd also be labeled with major depression, social anxiety disorder, borderline personality disorder, substance abuse disorder.
When you have a mental illness, it causes you great suffering, and when you're a normal person, you can sort of cope with it better. But for Laura, she was put on a lot of Prozac, and she just kept taking more and more medications and sort of feeling more and more removed from society and more identified with this sick person who was never going to have a functioning life and who was sort of chronically ill. The word prescription cascade is used to describe what happens when someone is prescribed a medication and there's a side effect of that medication, and then another medication is prescribed to treat that side effect, and then it keeps going like that. You get put on one medication and that causes maybe sexual dysfunction, so you get put on Viagra. Maybe the medication causes sleep difficulty, so you get put on Ambien, and then the Ambien is making you so groggy in the morning that you get put on Adderall. Laura felt lonely and isolated, and she wanted meaningful relationships, and medications were not going to give her that. Strangely, in the process of having these conversations with her, more and more medical literature kept being published about the difficulties that people have going off of medications, and particularly antidepressants. It is this growing awareness that there is this gap, that no one really knows how to get off of medications. Laura started a website with advice for people who want to taper off medication but don't have any infrastructure or advice about how to do so. A place where people could become more informed about the medications they were taking and what the experience would be like of going off of them.
Being free from over 10 years of psych drugs, I'm noticing how different things are.
On the forums where people are going off of medications, they'll describe things like, neuro-regret or neuro-guilt, and it's this sense that you're possessed by an emotion that doesn't feel true. Somehow it feels chemical. I would say the most recurring experience that people described that I found surprising was a sense of detachment. One person said that when he hugged his wife, he didn't feel love the way he used to feel love. And it's just impossible to sort of know where that comes from. But for him, he was very positive that it was something new that happened after going off the medications. For Laura, it was validating to realize that there were people noting that it's a peculiar and sort of undescribed experience of going off these medications.
Recovery, noun, 2. The action or process of regaining possession or control of something stolen or lost.
There's been really interesting books written about the ways in which antidepressants were described as fixing the parts of women that sort of didn't fare well in the workplace, making them sort of spunkier and more bold. Then there's a history before that of benzodiazepines, which are anti-anxiety medications. And this was in the 70s when benzodiazepines were really popular. Of those medications helping women feel more content and calm and able to fulfill their domestic duties. There's a long history, if you look at the way that pharmaceuticals have been advertised, that it sort of targeted the needs for a woman in a particular era. But I don't think that explains all of it. But I think that's worth looking at. For Laura, she's had this way of articulating how psychiatric language had sort of informed her own understanding of herself in a way that had sort of stood in for other forms of understanding, and she felt like the diagnoses had kind of become a self-fulfilling prophecy.
I was still holding on to the underlying belief that there was something abnormal inside of me, that I needed to get better.
She believed so deeply that she was bipolar that she read all of her activities and moods within that framework. There's sort of a feedback loop. You're described as depressed, and then you sort of feel like you have no reason to hope for more. She entered adulthood on so many medications that it was hard to sort of figure out what were natural weaknesses, what were natural passions. Everything was a little bit numb. But right now she is about to get married, and she just bought a new house, and so her life is in a really good place.
And I can feel from the tips of my toes to the top of my head who I am today. I can feel that I finally recovered myself.
We think about medications as fixing some sort of chemical imbalance, and that's a way simplified version of what actually happens. It's easy to ignore how many cultural and social factors there are, both in how we find our way to these drugs and also how we experience them and why we continue to take them.